Well, maybe Act Two that was started as Act One in the sense that people were not ready for that. They had not been defeated to the level and not sort of made to regret their own faith to a level where they could be proselytized in a manner of Christianity.
Right. The Christian missionaries will not have the success they have in Central America as they're doing right now, and not in Iraq. I don't think so.
No, but that's not the main issue, right? I'm asking.
Yeah.
I'm asking the role of the non-state actor. What's the role of the non-state
I
actor?
would like to respond to that question by pointing to this fundamental paradox of the extreme right in this country, the neocons. They want a strong empire, but they're hostile to the whole idea of state involvement. So one of the countries where we've seen the rise of non-state actors is this country. We now have private military companies with a great deal of offloading of the former business of conducting warfare out of the Pentagon, to private companies, some of which are owned by people extreme right wing, so they then make profits with public dollars, which then are folded back into the American political process on the extreme right. When Rumsfeld came to the Pentagon in 2001, he talked about the enemy, and the enemy was 70,000 Pentagon bureaucrats, and he gave them warning that he intended to redesign the Pentagon so that those functions would go out of the state somewhere else.
Total failure, because the Pentagon budget has since then doubled, more than doubled. The Pentagon bureaucracy has grown, and the amount of waste and corruption, unaccounted for funds,
trillions,
has increased. Yeah, trillions of it. But that raises the question that the empire feeds off the republic, and what we've seen, another victim of U.S. imperialism, is the U.S. itself. I mean, this country is falling apart. I know Tariq, he must travel around. I do. I feel I'm always in the same place. I go to this state, that city, and I pick up the paper, and it's always the same. City council facing budget crises, a state facing record deficit, this and that, cutbacks in this, cutbacks in that. So the empire is literally devouring the republic, and we see the near meltdown effects of that are this past week.
But you see, the other side of non-state actors. One is, of course, neoliberalism, privatizing war, creating companies linked to the Pentagon with ex-Pentagon people and ex-senior people on the boards of these companies. So Blackwater is a big example of that, but it also serves another purpose, that they can no longer recruit enough people to a totally volunteer army. In the second and third year of the war in Iraq, once a resistance there had emerged, the number of people wanting to join the U.S. Army, not the Air Force so much, but the Army, was right down. There was panic in the United States. They were taking people from the National Guard in Vermont who didn't join up for that and sending them into Iraq. So they had
sending them back for a second tour. Yes,
and so they had to organize these. The choice was either to increase the mercenaries. That's what they are. They call them private contractors, but good old-fashioned word for this is mercenaries, people you buy to go and kill in other parts of the world. The only other choice was to reintroduce conscription. And if they were to do that, the country would explode, because conscription is democratic. It affects every single family in the country. And they were not going to make that mistake, knowing what happened during the Vietnam War. So they went for these mercenaries. And they're increasingly now going in that direction in Afghanistan as well.
One other population stream they've tapped into, it's a small one, but it should be mentioned, are non-citizens and immigrants. They've actually put these people in the military with the promise that if they served, they would have citizenship when they got out, if they got out all in one piece.
And meanwhile, Blackwater recruits from the former dictatorships in Latin America. So there are a lot of veterans of Chile under Pinochet who, of course, were trained in all kinds of extreme activities, who are in Blackwater. Blackwater hasn't just been used in Iraq, it was also used in New Orleans after the Katrina hurricane. You had these very dubious mercenaries armed and with power to shoot and kill Americans, and not necessarily even American citizens behind the gun.
Peter, let me add a footnote to what you just said. I was in South Africa a few years ago and speaking at a meeting, and someone sent me a note, had just come in very excited. Evidently, the white South African who tortured and killed Steve Biko, the black consciousness leader in South Africa, was fighting in Iraq and had just been killed. And they said, could you just read this news item out?
Yes.
Well, I read it out and the whole meeting erupted.
Was he fighting as an American soldier or as
No,
a mercenary?
as a mercenary.
As a mercenary.
But I think that that point is very nicely made, that what we have is empire devouring the republic. Let's go to Middle East and beyond and see rise of the non-state actor in the global fight against hegemony and domination. How is that playing out?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean, but in the case
I mean
of,
by, let's say, Lebanon, we have Hezbollah.
I see, yes.
I mean, non-state actors propping up all over the place, not just one country.
Well, I think to go back to one of the
Popular
sources is Pakistan has been very changed by the enormous amount of American resources that were behind ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence Agency. And they, in turn, had their own agenda, which was not always the agenda of civilian leaders in Pakistan. And they have put money into the training of people to fight in Kashmir and India. So Iran has been doing the same thing. It's a precedent, really, for the whole region that states back powers fighting elsewhere. I believe that Hamas was originally encouraged by Mossad and the Americans as a counterweight to the PLO and al-Fatah.
Yeah.
And it's sort of blown back in their face that if you do this and weaken the governments everywhere, which of course Syria, I think, is now stable, but it had a terrible problem at one time. Lebanon has been at least twice destroyed by these non-state actors. And of course, to put the pieces together again in Palestine is going to be extremely difficult.
But at the same time, it's going to be extremely difficult also to make Palestinians fall in line just because you happen to control or intimidate one faction. Other
Yes.
factions are not going to fall in line.
Exactly.
So I think this phenomenon, non-state actor, needs to examine a little more closely, both at the regional level and at the country level and at the movement level, because the idea was you topple the government, you bring into your fold Musharraf or anybody else, and the job is done. Now that's not going to be the case. People are going to fight in different ways. I'm just wondering if you're reflecting, Tariq, your reflection.
Well, I think this is happening, and this is a process which was started, of course, in Pakistan and Afghanistan during when the Russians occupied Afghanistan, the creation of non-state groups by the ISI, backed by the United States at that time, funded by the United States to go and take on the Russians, has now become an epidemic. I mean, that's when it was started. All these people the US are trying to get hold of now were people who fought with them. And it's always worth reminding people of that for the following reason, that the mistakes that they made at that time, they're now repeating different mistakes now, which could have equally sort of strong repercussions 5-6 years from now. They never learn. But what is going on is that the groups now fighting the United States inside Afghanistan, the British intelligence refers to these as the Neo-Taliban. They say this is no longer the old organization.
They have a global perspective, don't they? At least that's what I've heard.